Welcome back, and welcome for the ones who just joined Programmers Week or the sessions today. My name is Alin. I'm the community manager for mobile and AI communities, and I'll be your host today for the mobile talks that we will present. Now we have the second mobile talk for today, presented by Razvan, one of our senior iOS developers in the largest mobile community in Romania that we have here in Cognizant Softvision. Razvan usually has talks related to coding inside our community, but recently he discovered he has a passion for UX design, and he wants to highlight today for you why you as a visual, let's say, developer, designer shouldn't care only about the code, but also about the experience you give to the end user. So without further ado, I'll let Razvan talk and start.
Thanks, Alin. Hi there. Thanks for joining us for Programmers Week. How are you? Obviously, you cannot reply, but I hope you are all safe and well. My name is Razvan. I am an iOS developer at Cognizant Softvision. Before we start, I encourage everyone to share your question in the Q&A module so I can answer them accordingly at the end. Today, I'll talk about human interface guidelines. And if you are an iOS developer, you should have at least heard about them. But I realized in my experience, that's not really the case. So don't worry, we're going to fix that today. So what are human interface guidelines? Before we explain, I would like to go into a story time. I want you to ask, how do you think the perfect team looks like? The manager understands and the project managers understands perfectly the requirements of the client. The designers take those requirements and create these beautiful, perfect designs. And then developers take them and then implement them, and they end up in the hands of our users. But that's not really the case. If it is for you, just so you know, I envy you. Usually, and most of the time, developers and designers take these decisions, and sometimes if it will be your responsibility as developer to do as such. Sometimes you're going to work on your side projects or maybe the small projects. So you're going to have to take these design decisions. But we don't really want to do that, right? Have you ever seen a developer bragging about the beautiful interface he has created? Not really. They will tell you how they injected that dependency at that perfect time and how modular and testable the code is. And the space for a designer is so vast that they don't really specialize in one platform. Most of the designers, in my experience, have their experience with web. So often what will happen is we're going to see some web patterns brought into our mobile applications, and we hate that, of course. And sometimes clients will insist to have both apps exactly the same on Android and iOS, and we also hate that. So that sounds familiar. This is the source of a lot of disagreements, and we have to fix them somehow, because as proud as we are on our perfect code, that it's, as we mentioned, testable and modular, and we are proud of our design that we use the perfect colors, the perfect fonts, the perfect everything. What really matters in the end is the experience that we give to the user. If it's almost sad to say that if your architecture is perfect, it's not going to matter if the app is not useful and the user don't know how to use it. And what do? We have to solve this somehow. We have to put the user at the center of this. And the sad news is you as a developer, and usually I say as a visual developer, a developer that creates something that is presented in a visual manner to the user, you really have to know about this stuff. you really have to know the patterns that are used in the industry. You really have to think about the experience that you're giving to the user. It's also the same for designers, UI designers, and more recently UX designers. Don't focus just on the how the app looks, but also how the app feels. So we have to agree on something, on some rules or some guidelines. You get it? And luckily we have them. We got back to we go back to the user interface guidelines, something that was created by Apple for the Apple ecosystem. But then I figured this is only the case for the iOS. I choose to speak about these because I know them well, but also if you are an Android developer or you are familiar with the Android ecosystem, for them it's the material design. So almost you can take this presentation and just change the human interface guidelines with the material design, and then you have the Android equivalent for this. So basically, the human interface guidelines are a set of rules and ideas that designers from Apple and people from Apple gathered while they developed the OS. Simply put, it's a set of rules to make your app feel like a good platform citizen. And what do I mean by this? Good platform citizen apps are apps that feel seamless for the user. Jumping from one app to another should not be an overhead for the user. And what do I mean by that? We don't want to annoy them. We don't want to stop them from what they were doing, because the mobile app ecosystem is so competitive today. There are a lot of apps that if you want to go with your own app on the App Store, it's almost impossible to get this popular as some other apps are. So the least thing that you want to do is to annoy the user and stop using your app and find some better app for that use case, right? So being a good platform citizen is like blending in with in my view, is blending in with the operating system. So what we can expect to find there. If you go to the Human Interface Guidelines website, you're going to see that you're presented with a lot of with the various operating systems categories, right? I choose to, and I mostly go on the iOS, but this is the first hint that we are presented with, that even though we are developing an application, it really matters the operating system that we are building it for. So if you're going on the Mac OS, some controls are different. On the iOS, even the app has to feel different. And why? Because the controls for these two platforms are different. On Mac OS and usually the web, we are used to use the keyboard and then the mouse or even the touchpad, right? That means the controls differ. So how would I go through this through the human interface guidelines? I would just focus on some things. The first thing that I would stop would be the controls, and I would understand what controls the framework gives us by default. We are really lucky to have this. The web is pretty wild in this case because they don't really have a set of default connection or default components that come with the operating system, and they have to create them themselves. We have lots of them, and each of that is created for a specific purpose. one advantage is that the user is constantly interacting with them throughout the operating system. So when you will use them inside the app, you don't have to train them to learn how to use them. Because they're already familiar with that, and that's a common thing. And that eliminates a lot of friction. So what I would do first is to understand what control and what was that created for in the first place, and learn where I can adapt. I would one interesting thing that a difference between the web or the Mac platform and the iOS. For the buttons, for example, we have to take into consideration that some people have some really big fingers, fat fingers, as we commonly joke around. And the mouse is a precise pointer with which we interact with the object. So, meaning that on the web, the buttons don't have to be that big, because it's with the pointer we can tap them and interact with them on a more precise level. For the buttons inside the app, we have to take into consideration that the user need to have them on their finger. One other thing that I would focus on is a lot of are colors and fonts. And I was really surprised when I read these guidelines that there's really a psychology reason behind using what we are using today. One interesting thing that the operating system comes with besides the controls are these colors that adapt for dark mode and light mode, which is a really common thing nowadays. If you're designing something, you have to take into consideration both the design for light and dark mode. And my initial impression was that it's all right, we're just gonna invert the colors, you know, like black becomes white and white becomes black, and the gray will somehow stay the same in between. But that's not really the case, because it's, as it turns out, it's more complicated for that, because it involves the contrasts. You see, while I'm describing this, it becomes really more complicated. That you have to remember that I have to use this color for these, like we see in the image, for these three states. But we don't really have to do that. If we use, for example, the secondary label color, we see that maybe with the eyes we don't exactly make the difference between the color, but it actually adapts to the environment that you have. One other thing that comes to elevate and make your content more contrasty are also materials that you can use. That blur that you see all inside the iOS and macOS, that elevates your content, and you can actually see behind it. So what I would do, I would spend a bit of time here to understand what fonts are giving us, you know, adapting to what user is changing the font size, or even the colors that we have to use in case the user goes from light to dark mode, and so on. So I would spend a bit of time here. Also, one other thing that's really underrated inside inside the mobile platform is the navigation, because we have this impression that we're just going to create that. And I actually had this situation where we had the screens and we had the information for the screen, but then we had no idea how to present it. Because when you design and develop something, it's not enough to just have everything prepared information, but to also know how to get there and where is that information required or even needed, right? So in iOS, we have this model presentation. You know, when you are over the context, you are actually starting a new context for the user, and then you go through most of the screens, and then maybe come back or even dismiss everything. And then we have this like pushing or going in depth, which, you know, if you think about it, has to encapsulate all the logic that's needed for that flow. So knowing these and how you can present the information might be really useful, because you're gonna get into situations where you might bury the information, right? If you have a lot of you know, business case and, you know, a lot of screens, you know, what do you usually do? You just go, you just create a settings page, and then somehow over there you're going to bury that information. But what if that information is needed sooner? What are you going to do with that? Coming back to the code, you know, some code is required here. You have to isolate that flow. You have to, you know, make sure you can present it earlier, and you have all the information needed prior to presenting that. But don't underestimate the importance of the navigation and how we presenting information. So how I would go with these human interface guidelines, we just go read everything. That's the simplest thing that you do. But with one minor caveat, don't try to understand every information line by line, because it's exhausting and it's extensive, and to be honest, you don't really need that much information. But if you're approaching it by reading it even between the lines, focus on the things that you know, are maybe new to you, or maybe you knew them but you didn't know the depth of that information. Right, like I said, like I told you with the colors, there's really a reason why we need to use some colors over the others. So I would do that, and you know, when I really need that information, the information is always there. You can find it at the URL. It's constantly updating with the release of every operating system. So keep an eye on the new things that show there. There's actually not only about this flat design, there's an entire section for the AR, for who's passionate about that. And they explain how you know, you can design and implement a really good AR application. So that was pretty cool. So when the time comes and you need to explore that information in depth, just come back, read through it, and you know, you're gonna get more knowledge into that. But using all these you know, default components and all these things that come out of the box from Apple wouldn't make our app look like a default one. And like the answer is no. But in reality, there's a two-part answer to this. The first part is, that's the beauty of it. They are just guidelines. You don't have to follow them per se, like line by line. Companies and usually businesses have something called branding. So they will often come with their own colors, their own fonts and images. and that makes them stand out and be recognized, you will often be constrained by that. These rules are really important when you're missing an entry point. Like if you have to develop an app and you have like nothing, if you don't know what you're doing, it's best to just start with the default components, and maybe even get inspired by the default apps on these OSs, like for example, for the iOS, get inspired by how the calendar is doing, how the contacts list or the messaging app is doing some things, and try to replicate them. You will usually be able to do that just with the standard components. And then, just build on that design, because if you try to, go full in custom components and your custom fonts and like everything, sadly, I don't think you're going to end up with something nicer than using the default components. So one other thing is, do I have to say no to complex things that come from the design just to use the guidelines and the default animation that the OS comes with? Well, you probably guessed it. The answer is still no, but I would take it as a challenge. I would not say no to a complex animation curiosity, and I would take my time to really understand why and how I can implement that animation or that design or that screen. But really what I will focus on, it's the time, because of course, when you implement complex designs and complex animation, time is really limited. And why is that? Because we have to deliver something in the time frame. We don't want to waste anyone's time, and especially the client's budget, to end up with a nice animation then the feature is missing, right? That would be super awkward. So if you are in this situation, just maybe think of the time frame that you have, and don't just say no to it just for the sake of it. Maybe you can postpone it, and really think about how required is that animation for that design. Because if we can deliver the feature without that animation, and we can later implement it, maybe it's best to test first how the feature is received, and not waste time, just make it pretty, and that's it. Because yeah, take everything as a challenge, right? Because most of the time we have this time to learn, to understand what's happening, to get more knowledge to that. But usually time is money, so we have to see how we approach these trade-offs. Right. Some key takeaways from this presentation is, don't try to reinvent the wheel. What I mean by this is, just really understand that you have some tools at disposal when you start a new project that were extensively tested and extensively, people did a lot of research to understand which is the best component for which case. They got inspired from the, for the things that we use every day, and made them digital. So I would not dismiss the system components just because I've seen something that looks nice. Usually something that looks nice doesn't it's not equal with something that is usable. And I remember an interesting story that I've read on LinkedIn, and you know how these LinkedIn posts are. you don't really know if they are true or not. But they said that McDonald's is spending a lot of money into studying where is the perfect spot for to place the restaurant there. They study the traffic, the people that work in the area, the demographic, and so on and so forth. They spend like billions on this. And Burger King does none of that. They just place the restaurants next to McDonald's, right? So one thing that you can take from this is maybe you can use those components that Apple spent billions on them and not, create your new ones. Another thing is that's important is understand how the OS works and understand what operating system you are developing for and the principles behind it. Because as I mentioned, users are used to interact with other apps, other system apps in a way, and when they come to your app, you don't want to make them think a lot. You don't want to spend time teaching them how they can use your app. It should be like a second nature to them because they've seen these before. That would be great for you because you don't have to develop, an onboarding and, think about how you can teach them. And it's a plus for you. It's a big plus for the user because they now have a usable app that they know how to use. Get familiar with what comes out of the box. This is really, really important. You cannot use something that you don't know it exists. Right. First of all, you have to know that the operating system gives you this, the framework, Apple or even Android gives you these tools, and then you have to, and then you can use them. So, I don't know, watch some design presentations every time a new operating system is launched, or read these guidelines. You will find out there like hints on when to use this or when you're not supposed to use this. Get inspired again by the native apps that the operating system comes with. And yeah, and in the end, build on it, create great apps, don't be shy to add your twist to them. Don't be shy to create something new. Because in the end, we need to have some, we as developers and designers, we need to have some kind of individuality to, we need to create something that we can later point that this was my design, this was created by me, so don't shy away from that. So yeah, that was it. We're going to the Q&A part of the presentation. Alin?
I don't see any questions.
Let's just give them some time. If you have questions, I'm not sure where you're typing them. There might be a section or a chat.
And in my connector also. So I have a question. What do you think it's I don't know, what aspect of this you think it's more important? Is it the visual or the, let's say, navigation and flow? The UX or the UI? Where would you focus more?
Yeah, so I mean, it's tempting to say that really the visual matters because this is what catches your eyes in the first place. But then if you go deeper and use that that app and you see that the UX, that the feeling that gives you, it's not that nice, automatically in your mind you're just gonna it will stop there, right? You're not gonna use it because you cannot use it. So one thing that I'm inclined to go with is just make sure your UI has a great logic to it, a good logic, and it respects this UX patterns. And then if you have this, you can actually add the visual later, right? because this was in the key takeaways. Don't focus on that much on this idea that the user will not love your app because the design is not that nice as the other apps. I think the usability promise.
Okay, so the UX, let's say it's more important. And do you usually we are back? Sorry for the technical difficulties. So we had one more question that Razvan is here to answer. What do you think about aligning iOS and Android design? Should we make them the same even if some elements are not platform specific?
Right. So, you know, every time an operating system comes, there's this beef between iOS and Android that iOS copied something from Android and Android copied something from iOS. The good part from this thing is that we are aligning even on components level. So there are not that many differences between the platforms on how you use components. So my gut feeling is that just keep the iOS and Android separate. I still cannot say why some clients want this alignment, this this one-on-one with the Android app. But I think when you're using, controls for gathering data from the user, if you have like a form, for example, these things take time to implement and make them the same. And it again comes back to the time that you need to implement that for, because it's one to use that standard component, for example, a date picker. You just get the date and that's it. And it's another thing to spend 1 week to get that UI that will probably not be as extensively tested and be the same as on Android and vice versa. So it really matters on the time that you have at disposal, the understanding of the client, and then of course the budget. Like if they really want to spend that time and money on that, again, take it as a challenge. Implement that and learn how you can implement a custom control. So that's a bonus for you as a developer.
Or you could use a cross-platform technology like Flutter that does that for you. But even with Flutter and React Native, they still have custom controls for iOS and Android, so they are separating them also, even that. But you're right. I think in the last years, the platforms became so let's say similar in terms of UI UX. They become very similar. So now it's easier, let's say, for the user and for the developers. Another question is, how important do you think is for QA to have a good understanding of the human interface guidelines? As for developers, you already mentioned.
Yes, super important. I mean, the QA, I think it's the most diverse job in terms of the technologies that they use. Because like as for designers, the QAs don't really specialize. You don't really have an iOS QA and an Android QA. Usually you're going to have one person that tests all the platform. Having that said, I think it's important for him or her to know the differences, because this will make a difference in reporting the bugs. Because if something looks different between platforms, that might be intended, right? That control is different because the operating system is supposed to function like that. So if he or she is not aware of the difference, they might report a bug, and then you go into that awkward conversation when you have to explain that's not really a bug and that's not really intended. So I think, yeah, they should definitely spend some time and get familiar with basically all the operating system. I know it's probably hard, but I think it comes with the job.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, especially when some designs just come like high-level designs, or come like designs for one platform and the others just need to adapt. So it's really important to know the differences. Cool. So I wanted to ask you if you use any tools for when you try to design like a UI UX, right? The user flow. Do you use any tools, or do you use a pencil and a paper and design the flow? Or I know in the past you could use the storyboards for that. I don't know if, but that also could become a little bit less confusing when you reach a large number of storyboards. But what do you use nowadays?
Yeah, so I think it really depends. Because if you think about it, if you are in charge to design for multiple platforms, the ideal ways is to choose an app like Figma, for example, to develop it there, and then give the design to the developers specifically or not for the platform, right? If you're an iOS developer and you're just trying to develop, for example, just the iOS app, I'm not sure how much value you're going to see in designing it first in Figma and then implement that design. One common path that the developer can do is to just implement the design and experiment with it. But it really depends on how complicated it is for that to implement. Because one thing that comes to my mind is, for us developing a UI kit, it really takes some time to from the code to the app running in the simulator. But now we have these tools like SwiftUI and Jetpack on Android, which is really fast to put something on the screen and see it visually. So a SwiftUI developer or Jetpack developer might use it as a design tool, not just as a way to deliver that app. It's a bonus that you can deliver it, but you can actually design it in this thing. And I'm not familiar with the cross-platform side, but I know they have this option of hot reloading. If you have a tool for hot reloading and get instant feedback for that design, I think you can see value in actually coding it than designing it statically.
Okay, so you're saying that first just implement using dummy data, for example, not the entire app, just the UI with dummy data, dummy buttons, and see how it looks and how you can interact with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I hate to say that it depends because it is the usual answer, but I think depending on your situation, yeah, you can actually mock your data and start implementing the design.
Okay. What do you and do you use, like, when you develop your let's say if you're an iOS developer and you're working on your app, right? You don't have a UI designer. How many, I don't know, let's say color palette, how large is your color palette? How large should be your color palette when you establish your color scheme and stuff like that? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I don't think you want an app that has 20 colors for on each screen or something like that.
Yeah, so like, first of all, I have to say I'm not a designer. I have a passion for design, but I'm not actually a designer. But how do I approach this? So what you described, Alin, is actually called, it has a formal name, it's called a design system. When you designers and UX designer use this design system as a rule for their own designs. And from what I've seen, they don't really use the colors as colors. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'll try to explain. They try to name the colors as we do inside our apps as primary colors, secondary colors, and so on. And what I think you have to, so when you design something, I think you have to approach it from the what do you need first, right? You need a primary color, you need an accent color, you need a secondary color, and so on. And then having these, sorted out into variables, or put them in your asset catalog. That then you choose the colors. So yeah, there are some rules on how to use colors. I have big issues with that. I don't think I could be a really good UI designer, because I'm not really good with colors, with visuals, but I understand the experience behind them. So I don't know, maybe try to use some tool that gives you a palette. Just, there are websites that generates these for you. I think the thumb rule is just keep it simple, use as few as you can.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to reach. I mean, there is the primary color, the secondary color, and I think the one with the accents. So these three are the main ones, and then you can use variation of those for your app, but not a totally different color from another spectrum inside that. Yeah, cool. So I think, yeah, this is an interesting topic. I mean, I think it's as you said, it's not known by many developers. I think many of them just take the UI that's given by the designer and implement it. So yeah, it was a good insight. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, if you have any more questions, you can pretty much find me everywhere as that tag. And yeah, stay safe.
Thank you, and see you in 15 minutes for the next one.